man's terrorism, terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. We need to be clear on that.
Scott, what do you think of Trump's response? What makes me more optimistic is that Trump, when I first saw Hamas's response, I thought Trump would be pissed off. He wouldn't take credit for it because they did not really, their stance hasn't changed much. They're just they've changed their tonality. Maybe their intentions, but it's, a 5 to 10% incremental improvement. Yet Trump is calling it a success, and he said Hamas is ready for a peace plan, for a long-term peace plan, and he asked Israel to stop the bombing Gaza, to stop the attacks, and Israel has abided by Trump's request. Is some arguing that Trump is focusing more on optics rather than realism because there hasn't really nothing has really changed, or another way of looking at it is that Trump, despite Hamas's stance not having changed much, he is pressuring Israel to try to end the war because he wants to become to be seen as the peace president. Which one do you think is more likely to be accurate?
Trying to read Donald Trump's like trying to read tea leaves in a Dubai chai house. It's whatever you want to see. I am opting this time that he's serious about peace, that this isn't just about optics, because where do optics take you? We see right now the eternal frustration that Trump has about Ukraine and Russia because he chose optics over substance and ignored reality, and he's left hanging. Here, there is reality, and the reality is Hamas isn't going away. Trump can't make it go away. Hamas doesn't respond to threats. I mean, what is Trump going to do? Blow up the buildings that have already been destroyed by Israel? When he says all hell will break loose, all hell has broken loose. There's not an additional hell that Trump can impose. He needs peace in the Middle East. He needs this conflict to come to an end. The question I have isn't the desire of Donald Trump or the intent of Donald Trump. I do think it's clear here in this case that he desires peace. His intent is to bring an end to the fighting. And he is a businessman, a transactional leader. Again, you brought up a very important point. American officials are shaking hands with Jolani, a man responsible for the deaths of Americans when he was with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, a man who fought the Americans in Iraq, a man who was responsible for ISIS deaths of Americans in Syria. And today we're shaking hands. We recognize this government. And this is Donald Trump that's doing this. So the idea that you can reform a terrorist organization, reform a terrorist leadership, isn't to be dismissed outright, because we have a clear precedent of the reformation of terrorists. Yeah. Can Donald Trump get Israel to buy into this? That's the big question. This is the road. The roadblock isn't Hamas. I believe Hamas is ready to make a deal, which is why Donald Trump, a deal maker, is sort of pleased, because now a deal is in the process. Negotiations are underway. And Donald Trump has always said, I like the strong guys. There ain't nobody stronger on the table today than Hamas. All right. They are as strong as anybody. They are as resilient as anybody. And I think Donald Trump knows this. Can he get Israel? Can he get Netanyahu to come along? And this is the $1 million question, because to do that would require the United States to be willing to put pressure on Israel that to date, no American president has been able to do. And Donald Trump, who has surrounded himself with cabinet members and such who are extremely supportive of Israel, are loath to support that kind of pressure. So that's the weak link.
Exactly. That concerns me as well. Yeah, I'm really curious how he could do this, because I want to go through again. Me and you agree that this is very similar to Hamas's stance in prior negotiations. So the three big points here is, number one, hostage release. Hamas has said multiple times before, we will release the hostages if Israel and obviously releases Palestinian hostages or prisoners, as they agreed to in this new deal, Trump's deal, a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and an end to the blockade. Now, this is a sticking point now, because in Trump's peace plan, it wasn't a full withdrawal from Israel, from what I understand. It was a partial withdrawal with a buffer zone there. So in this deal, it's relatively the same thing, except there's a buffer zone in there. Number two is a governance handover. They've hinted before that they would hand over governance to an independent body, interim national government with Fatah and other factions. But they wanted to play a part in that governance. Same thing now. They've said the same thing. They didn't explicitly say they are happy to have an independent body they are not part of. So that hasn't changed much, maybe incrementally. And number three is the disarmament. They've disagreed. They've rejected it previously, as we've said before, hinted that they could accept it if there's a two-state solution. And in this case today as well, they haven't really accepted it. So if you look at those things, not much has changed. Yet Trump is trying to get credit and trying to hint that Hamas is ready for peace. That's a really positive development. Now, you've mentioned a really important sticking point. How can he convince Netanyahu to stop this war? And Netanyahu has agreed to a ceasefire now, and they're apparently preparing for prisoner swap or hostage swap. What do you think will happen next? And how do you think Trump will be able to pressure or convince Netanyahu to end the war? Because it is a very important point, Scott. I want to reiterate the point you made, is that Trump does not want the same embarrassment or I'd use the word failure as he's had in Russia, where he expected things to go really well after meeting Putin, and things kind of ended up for the worst.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to denigrate Keith Kellogg too much, but Keith Kellogg is the Benjamin Netanyahu of the Ukraine-Russian thing. Keith Kellogg keeps whispering things in Trump's ear that, creating artificialities that just aren't reflected by reality. The question, look, I actually think that Hamas, by not rejecting disarmament, means disarmament's on the table. And I do believe that if Trump is a deal maker, and he should understand the concept of, as he does with this 20-point plan, phased action. And I believe that, Hamas will never disarm up front because they can't trust Israel. Nobody can trust Israel. Israel can't trust Israel. So any disarmament that takes place would only take place at the tail end of whatever deal is eventually worked out. Once, people have been released, once a governing structure has been put in place, once, security guarantees have been, because that's an important thing. Who's going to guarantee the security of Gaza? I agree. From the Israeli perspective, you can't rehabilitate Gaza and allow Hamas to remain as a viable military force, because inevitably the situation will deteriorate and we'll just be back on the path of a repeat of October 7th. And actually, I think Hamas agrees as well. I really do believe that at this juncture, Hamas has accomplished what it wanted to accomplish, which was to create a pathway towards a Palestinian state. And this is where people need to be optimistic. And I think Islamic Jihad as well. The Palestinian people have suffered enough. And suffered too much, to be honest. This is just ridiculous what's happening today. It's just beyond words. And I don't think Hamas gains anything by continuing this struggle. In fact, they could be in danger at some point in time of losing whatever,
support,
talking points they've achieved, because blame could shift away from Israel. And right now, the blame is all on Israel. I know the Israelis blame Hamas, but around the world, Israel's just losing support, bleeding, shredding support. And Hamas has reached its high point in this. I think to continue the struggle without appearing to be serious about peace would only be to the detriment of Hamas, because eventually the blame is going to also be transferred to Hamas on an international level. I think the hostages they have no more value right now. To hold on to them to create a domestic political problem for Israel Hamas.
I think Hamas is giving ammunition. It's giving ammunition to Israel. It's giving them a reason to justify the war. That's one of the biggest mistakes, biggest disservice they're doing to Palestinians is keeping those hostages.
I think Hamas now agrees as well. I think they need to return the hostage. First of all, that's a positive thing for them. It would be a very positive move. But you can't do something in a vacuum. Meaning, if you give up the hostages and then it go back to the war, it doesn't. It's a chip, and I hate to say that because these are human beings who have been suffering for very long, and I hate to view them as a chip. But the reality is, they are a negotiating chip, as are the Palestinians being held by Israel. By the way, but it's time to put that chip on the table and clear it, get it out of here, because it's not helping Hamas's cause anymore. It's actually to the detriment of Hamas. It gives legitimacy to the Israeli actions. So you delegitimize the concept of return of the hostages, but then you have to legitimize peace. What does peace look like? And this is where efforts are going to have to be made to get Israel to transition from where they are today. I mean, look, this is the Israel that said, we're going to bomb Qatar, an American ally. We're just going to do it, and we don't care.
Ironically, it's the same people that tried to kill in Qatar right now are the ones accepting this peace deal. Everyone forgot this irony. The same, and the argument people were making, we're agreeing on a lot today. We usually disagree on some things, but today we agree on a lot, including this point that the same people that tried to bomb in Qatar that they said were an obstacle to peace are the people that are potentially agreeing to the peace deal that everyone's happy about, at least so far. There is a counter argument to this, and I want to get your thoughts on it, is that the strike on Qatar caused fear in the negotiators in Qatar and Doha, forcing them to accept this deal. So it's all part of the same strategy. I don't agree with this because, they aim to kill them, not scare them. But, I don't know if that's a fair argument to be made, that because they feel that their life is in danger now, even Qatar, they have no choice but to accept the peace deal. Yeah,
but that shows a total disrespect for, I mean, to buy into that means that you believe that the Hamas concept of martyrdom is a lie. And I think the Hamas resistance fighters, Sinwar and others, have proven that they're willing to give their lives for this cause. None of the Hamas leadership shies away from the concept of martyrdom, that they firmly believe that the cause of Palestine is worthy of their lives. And I don't think you scare these people that way. I mean, I understand the concept, and it's wishful thinking on the part of people who use fear as an intimidation tactic. But if you could make Hamas afraid, then this war would have been over a long time ago, because some very bad things have been happening to people, to human beings, to Hamas officials. They're losing senior leadership. Every day you hear the Israelis took out this battalion commander, this person, that person, and yet people rise to replace them and continue the struggle. While I agree with you, people are making that argument, I don't think that argument actually holds water. Yeah,
I agree there again. There is another thing that concerns me, is that Hamas is no longer just one organization. I feel Hamas has become a movement, because there's been so many people. I think almost every single person in Gaza has had a loved one, a relative, or a friend that's been killed or injured by this war. That means they're all full of hate. They're all full of revenge. And that leads to a movement that cannot be controlled by one party. And there's already a report by Wall Street Journal that there's a split within Hamas, that the negotiators in Qatar don't have full control of the members of Hamas that are fighting on the ground. As you said, Islamic Jihad is also a separate organization. And there's fears as well that a lot of these members of Hamas that want to continue the war, and they want to seek either just revenge, or they want more concessions on the Israeli side, such as an actual two-state solution, they would form their own organization. And why is that a concern? Is if you've got that other organization that continues the war, that justifies for Israel to continue their strikes. Now Hamas is weakened. They don't have any more hostages to negotiate. And Israel will continue their attacks on Gaza, because there's still those alienated, radicalized Palestinians that form their own faction, or that are part of Hamas, that continue the war. And I'll give you a clause in Trump's peace plan that allows Israel to continue this. Israel seeks to de-radicalize. How can you de-radicalize a region that's just been radicalized by years of death and destruction? De-radicalize, terror-free zone, which is very vague. A terror-free zone, everything is labeled as a terrorist attack now. If let's say after this peace deal, a few members of Hamas, they kind of create their own faction with a few hundred people, and they start attacking Israel, well, that's no longer a terror-free zone. Does that allow Israel to remain in Gaza? So what worries me is that there's vague points in the Trump plan, and there is so much pain and hate within Gaza after this 2-year war, that it makes a peace plan pretty much impossible based on Israel's requirements.
I mean, nothing you're saying is intellectually illegitimate. It's all logically.
But how can one be optimistic though? How can it be? How is
The
that? How is a
alternative-
peace plan even feasible? That's my concern. So how is it even feasible? Because I'm sure people, after being bombed to that level, it's hard to imagine people. Like, imagine people listening right now. Just imagine your son, your daughter, your mother, your sister. You see her dead body, their dead body under the rubble. Imagine the hate you have in your heart.
But let me give you an example from history.
Please.
The Soviet Union lost 27 million people to Nazi Germany. The Nazis did things to the Russians that make anything Israel did to the Palestinians pale in comparison, both in scope and scale. Entire cities, entire regions were devastated by the Nazi Germans. And the Russians, the Soviets, fought back, took Berlin, and they made peace and learned to live in peace with the Germans. Now, they defeated the Germans, but now even when Germany reunified, there was West Germany. The Russian-German dynamic until recently, has been a very positive one. If you go to Russia today, they'll tell you stories. I mean, they say, we will never forget, but we have learned to forgive because we have to forgive, because we have to move on. And so I would say that it's clearly within the human experience to forgive. And I will also say this, that in the Middle East, look, I'm somebody who was reviled in Iraq for a long time. They misunderstood what I was doing, but they blamed me personally for the deaths of millions of Iraqis because I was the face of the United Nations weapons inspection process that continued economic sanctions against Iraq that caused 500,000 children to perish. When I traveled to Iraq near the end, they would put broadcasts on TV saying Scott Ritter has returned. Abu Azamat, the father of all crises, he's the one responsible for all our death, all our suffering. And, and I know that, but even as a weapons inspector there, I would be confronted by mothers, by Iraqi civilians who said, we understand you have a job to do. We wish you would get your job done. But we forgive you for whatever. And I'm like, well, I didn't do anything that requires forgiveness because I'm just doing my job. I'm not the sanctions guy, but it didn't matter. In their hearts, they viewed me as a man responsible for the deaths of many innocent Iraqis. And yet, even while that system was in place, they had forgiven me for what they perceived to be my sins. So I think there's forgiveness in the hearts of Middle East people. I think it's sort of racist to imply that the Palestinians couldn't forgive the Israelis for what they have done.
I agree, Scott. I'll give another example that agrees with your point. Is that I went to Rwanda where I saw the memorials and understood the genocide that happened there. I met the president, spoke to him for 3 hours about it. And what happened in Rwanda pales anything I've ever seen anywhere in the world. Yeah. Just the way one ethnic group killed another, killed babies, their heads smashed. It's just a massive genocide over a very short period of time. And they forgave each other. And there's people right now walking on the streets of Rwanda that could tell you of horrors they've witnessed just a few years ago, that was in the 90s, of loved ones that were killed, and they've forgiven their neighbors. It was neighbors. It wasn't just another country. So forgiveness does exist, but there's an exception. And I'll use you as an example. Your stance on the war has changed. I don't know if you've publicly apologized for the Iraq war, but you've criticized it publicly. You've criticized American foreign policy and what led to the Iraq war. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that allowed people it made it easier for people to forgive. So I think for Palestinians to forgive, there needs to be some sort of change on the Israeli side as well. It takes two to reach, takes two to the tango. It takes both parties to be able to reach a position, because if Israel continues doing to Gaza, and I know I'm being a bit too critical and a bit too pessimistic today than usual, but if there isn't change in Gaza to what we've seen prior to October 7th and what we're seeing right now in the West Bank and all the settlements, if there isn't that change, then how do you expect Palestinians to forgive the same country that continues to blockade the region, that continues to expand the settlements in the West Bank? Do you know what I mean? They've been radicalized further than they were at October 7th, and the issues have not been resolved. They still do not have a state.
No, I agree. But let me just correct the record real quick. The forgiveness that was offered to me was in 1998. So it was 5 years before the second war with Iraq. The war I fought in was 1991, and I've never asked for forgiveness for that. Iraq invaded and occupied Kuwait. The international community was united that that will not stand. A Chapter 7 resolution was passed authorizing the use of military force, and I was part of a coalition of nations assembled by President George Herbert Walker Bush to achieve the liberation of Kuwait. And I will never apologize for anything I or any American did during that conflict. And I was authorized by a Chapter 7 resolution to participate in the disarmament of Iraq, and I will never apologize for anything I did in Iraq as a weapons inspector. And that's why I said I didn't do anything that required forgiveness. That was their perception that I was responsible for, the American policy of continuing sanctions no matter what. And they still forgave me. But the change, you say, came that I didn't find the authorization of force in 2003 to be legitimate. And that's true. I think we went to war on a lie, the lie of weapons of mass destruction, to cover for our real goal and objective of regime change. But I just wanted to be clear on that because I'm a stickler for the details on things like this.
Thank you. Thank you.
But let me throw in another reason why I'm more optimistic today.
That's different. That's the first time you're more optimistic than I am, Scott. It's a change.
I know. This is weird. It's like it. An episode of Seinfeld, opposite day. But I don't like to invoke the name Charlie Kirk, but unfortunately, he's part of history. I mean, his murder, etc. But from that came a discussion, a debate that's taking place in the United States, and I don't want to go down certain rabbit holes, but the reality is there's a perception that what was a foundation of support for Israel within the American Christian Zionist movement, Christian evangelicals, that's been shaken, and that people were beginning to question whether or not the United States should continue to support Israel. And then you see things like, the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu talking about, the need to take control of social media networks, to include X, by the way, to shape pro-Israeli narratives. And many Americans are balking against this. Americans who, have bought into the Make America Great Again, America First concept, and are starting to say, well, wait a minute, is this Israel first? And the fact that Netanyahu has come out and addressed this directly means that this resonates inside Israel. And I do think that there is a political dynamic attached to this that can be exploited by the United States, meaning that Donald Trump can tell Netanyahu the support for your cause is waning. And if you want to continue to play the hard line, actually at a time when Hamas has accepted the potential of peace, you could see support just drip away before you know it. Trump has already said openly that Israel no longer has the control of Congress that it once enjoyed.